Think you know Ken Curtis? The man with the Festus Hagen smile. But there's another Ken Curtis, behind the scenes, and his story has never been told. That story belongs to Ken Curtis, the man millions of American audiences know as Festus Hagen in Gunsmoke. He brought laughter and resilience to every living room, but behind the spotlight was a life few people know, marriages, quiet years, and a sad ending that left both an abandoned house and a net worth untouched. Today, we'll follow Ken Curtis from the legendary Western on screen to his quiet final years to see the full picture of the man behind the character. And to begin, we will not go straight into the spotlight, but will enter the story from a place where everything has fallen silent, Ken Curtis's house. Where each wall, each old piece of furniture still silently retains the warmth of a life even though the owner has long since left. The dirt road leading to the top of the hill in rolling hills is as thin as a thread, hidden among tall trees and bushes. At the end of the slope, the house appears, no longer a home, only the shape of memories. The porch is curved, the paint is peeling, the wind seeps through the faded wood, carrying the musty smell of past rainy seasons. The heavy wooden door opens with a creaking sound. Light filters through the large window, cutting into thin strips on the faded carpet, where dust hangs like grains of time. The furniture is still in its original place, the armchair is worn, the tabletop is marked with cups, the chandelier hangs crookedly. From the living room, the fireplace leads into a small bathroom with pale tiles, relics of a bygone era. The kitchen is located deep in the back, once the heart of the house. Now the kitchen counter is peeling, the wooden cabinets are open on their hinges. On the walls, the red tiles still retain a bit of the old warmth, as if still echoing the smell of morning coffee and the sound of a late guitar. Upstairs, the dark wood-paneled hallway slows the pace. The bedroom opens to light from a large window overlooking the grassy hillsides. On the windowsill, a thick layer of dust marks a lost vase. On the curved porch, a crooked swing swings gently in the wind, making a soft clanging sound, looking out at the layers of hills that stretch to the horizon. The house neither complains nor calls for help. It stands there, guarding Festus's raucous laughter, a Western song, the warmth of the kitchen, and the handprints on the stair railing. All that remains is the thin breath of wood and fading light, like a story waiting to be told. But these old walls don't just hold in the damp and the howling wind, they also hold the story of a man who once stepped out of the legendary West, and then quietly slipped out of the spotlight, Ken Curtis. Ken Curtis, the name that millions of American audiences remember with the husky voice and tough gait of Festus Hagen in Gunsmoke. But before he became part of the legendary Western on screen, he was just Curtis Wayne Gates, a boy growing up in Lamar, Colorado, in a family of farmers and a sheriff father. Curtis's childhood did not take place on the streets of Hollywood, but in the atmosphere thick with the rusty smell of prison bars. His father, Dan Gates, was the warden of the county jail, and from a young age, Curtis was accustomed to opening the cell doors and bringing meals to notorious bandits. It was not child's play, but it was that environment that taught him toughness, understanding both the eyes of the outlaw and the majesty of the law. Those experiences quietly followed Curtis throughout his life. When he played the role of Festus, the rough but kind-hearted sheriff, he did not act mechanically according to the script. He acted from memory, from the drawls of drunken cowboys to the watchful eyes of his father on night patrol. But Ken Curtis was more than just Festus. Before Hollywood knew him, Curtis was moving America with his music. One of the most famous Western groups of all time, his deep baritone voice was heard in the Sons of the Pioneers. He sang of endless fields, of sunsets on the prairie, melodies that he later carried into every scene he filmed. Off-screen, Curtis was a simple, warm, and extremely loyal man. He and his wife Tori Arn Curtis shared both the brightest days and the quietest moments of their lives. Although he had no biological children, he maintained a strong bond with his family and friends, just as he preserved every melody and story he had experienced. To the audience, Ken Curtis was Festus. But to those who knew him in real life, he was a gentleman who loved music, loved the West, and valued every relationship. And it was that real person that permeated every step, every line of dialogue he made on screen, making Festus Hagen not just a character but an unforgettable part of America's memory. Ken Curtis was born on July 2, 1916, in a small Colorado town, the youngest of 3 brothers. His hometown was a place of endless red dirt roads, bitter winter winds, and the smell of hay in the summer. The Curtis family lived simply, but disciplined, partly because his father, Dan Gates, was the county sheriff. In 1926, when Curtis was 10 years old, the family moved to Los Animas, the capital of Bent County. From his mother, Curtis learned warmth and patience, and his father taught him to look someone in the eye when talking. It was this interplay of discipline and love that helped Curtis understand that every person has a story, a lesson he later portrayed clearly in his role as Festus Hagen. In his personal life, Curtis had 3 marriages. In 1943, he married actress Lorraine Page, but the relationship ended after only a few years. In 1952, Curtis married Barbara Ford, daughter of legendary director John Ford. This marriage opened the door to Hollywood for him, but it only lasted until 1964. Curtis's final destination was Tori Ahern Connolly, a horse trainer, who stayed by his side until his death. Although he had no biological children, he considered Tori's 2 stepchildren as his own. To his friends and neighbors, Ken Curtis was a man who would open his door, pour you a cup of coffee or a whiskey, and listen until late at night. His home reflected that person, simple, unpretentious, but full of stories, like his life, a full life, always attached to his roots. If you ever watched a Saturday night episode of Gunsmoke, you'll remember Festus Hagen's drawl and half-joking eyes. Before audiences knew him on screen, Curtis had made a deep mark in music. In 1941, he joined Tommy Dorsey's band, temporarily replacing Frank Sinatra. He later became the lead singer of the legendary Western group Sons of the Pioneers. With his warm bass voice, Curtis and the group made their mark with songs like Room Full of Roses and Ghost Riders in the Sky. Music brought Curtis to the movies. Thanks to his marriage to Barbara Ford, he became the son-in-law of director John Ford and had the opportunity to appear in many classic films, alongside names like John Wayne and Henry Fonda. From Rio Grande, The Searchers to How the West Was Won, Curtis proved himself not only a singer but also a solid actor. In 1964, Curtis got his big break when he joined Gunsmoke, replacing Dennis Weaver as Festus Hagen. Initially, Festus was just a supporting character, but Curtis breathed his real-life experiences into it, from his walk, voice, to his dialogue. After a short time, Festus became one of the most beloved characters in the series, sticking with the audience for 11 seasons and more than 300 episodes. Not chasing after the noisy halo, Curtis chose to live a slow life amidst his brilliant career. He still sang, still acted, still toured at fairs and Western shows, bringing laughter and music to audiences across America. In every appearance, he always brought with him the spirit of the free, resilient, and friendly West. The spotlight can make a person shine, but when it goes out, the darkness behind becomes clear. For Ken Curtis, leaving Gunsmoke in 1975 was not a sudden fall, but a slow retreat. He continued to tour, still appeared in a few television and film projects, but the weight of age and minor heart attacks forced him to gradually reduce his activities. Friends say that, although he still kept his Festus smile, he sometimes sat alone backstage for long periods of time, as if talking to his own past. Without biological children, Ken Curtis found simple joy with his wife, Tori Ahern Curtis, and her 2 children, in a quiet house in Clovis, California. But loneliness still crept in on afternoons without the sound of guitar or laughter from the audience. On the morning of April 28, 1991, he passed away in his sleep in Fresno, leaving behind a net worth of about $5 million, mostly from his 16 years with Gunsmoke, along with recording contracts, acting roles, and production work. The bulk of his fortune belongs to his wife, family, and the charities he quietly supported. He did not own an entertainment empire like many Hollywood stars, but he left something more valuable, a cultural legacy deeply imprinted in the American memory. More than 300 episodes of Gunsmoke featuring the image of Festus Hagen, the gruff but righteous sheriff, are still being shown, showing future generations a harsh and humane West. His recordings with the Sons of the Pioneers still resound on the radio, maintaining his warm, rustic voice. And for the millions of viewers who grew up with Gunsmoke, Ken Curtis left behind not just a role, but a sense of familiarity, a face that made them smile every time he appeared. Perhaps, that was his most valuable asset. Ken Curtis has been out of the spotlight for more than 3 decades, but his image lives on in the memories of those who tuned in on a weekend night to watch Gunsmoke. There, Festus Hagen walked into town with dusty boots, a smile, and a mischievous glint in his eye. He didn't just play a character, he lived the character, bringing to it his Colorado childhood, the stories he heard from his father, and his love of the West. Perhaps that's why Festus never goes out of style, because he was a combination of honesty, simplicity, and a sense of humor that anyone can find in themselves. Ken Curtis' legacy isn't just his $5 million fortune or his film awards. It's the moments when he made people laugh on a long day, or feel warm on a lonely night. He reminds us that the greatest value lies not in how famous you are, but in what you leave in the hearts of others. And somewhere, amid the black and white footage and distant guitar sounds, Ken Curtis lives on, not as a Hollywood star, but as an old friend, always ready to knock on the door of our memories. Anyone who has ever heard Festus's raucous laugh or Ken Curtis's deep voice carries a piece of the West in their heart. If today's story brings back memories, keep them alive by sharing them in the comments. And if you want to continue to be accompanied by stories like this, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, so that every time memories knock, we can open the door together.